Welcome to another episode of Between Two Amps. Picking up from last week, again, we're with Ace Von Johnson. It was a great guest. This week we'll be kind of picking up on the second half of his career so far. Still going on. In this episode, picking up where we left off with talking about U.S. bombs and his journey with Duane Peters, and then getting into what it's like, life with new bands, and starting to play with how he ended up in Faster Pussycat and LA Guns, and just talking about what it's like being a musician for so many years now. Hope you enjoy it.
He was looking for a life that would give him the feeling of being worthwhile.
Yeah, where was I on before?
I forgot where we left off.
Oh,
So we were in the journey of Duane Peters.
My bullshit.
Oh, yeah.
So Duane Peters brought me into this band, and we toured a bunch. Like I said, we went out Circle Jerks and everybody, and we did dates on Warped Tour, which was weird. But I think at that time they had like a old man stage where it was like the Dickies, seriously, like the Dickies,
Yeah.
TSOL, Duane Peters, and like 3 or 4 other
Older bands. Yeah.
that maybe even Youth Brigade, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And did that. We had 3 guitar players off and on, but it was mostly bullshit. It was mostly just like a rhythm guy, and then like me, who was doing I was the melody guitar player, but it's bullshit. I was just doing rhythm stuff.
Yeah.
And but you go see Bad Religion if Gerwitz comes back,
Right.
Mr. Brett shows up, and they get 3 guitar players. So it kind of worked at times, but mostly it was just so that I don't know what the point was.
I love the people who they don't really know the punk scene that well, and they're just like, yeah, so are you rhythm or lead? I'm like,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah.
No.
There's a lot more to it.
Neither.
I mean, there's a lot to be said just about punk rock DIY ethics that guys like the 3 of us have pulled and applied to other genres or other bands
Yeah,
or
for sure. Yeah.
other stuff. And I think there's a lot to be said about that. Just with I keep using this term, but grassroots ethics of another state of mind. Hey, we want to go on tour. Okay, how do we book a tour?
Yeah.
I mean, I know we all did it, and so
even like you were talking about before, where you're in a practice space and you're basically there, you had nothing to do, and you're just like, I'm gonna watch these videos and fucking learn how to play this shit.
Yeah, there was no,
it's like, yeah, you didn't go to a proper school or anything like that. You just fucking did it because you wanted to be a better guitar player. You wanted to be a better musician.
I had no choice, and there was no ego involved. It was everything was quarterly, where I was like, okay, I'm here, I'm in this band right now, but what do I want for the next, where do I want to be in 6 months? I wasn't I'm going to be rich and famous and buy a house in the hills and drive a fancy car. Obviously, I never got that far anyways, but it wasn't, when I'm playing in fucking U.S. bombs, I wasn't what kind of Corvette am I going to buy next year? It just wasn't a real thing. And then the other thing is that I never had a lesson. I wish my mom had tried to get me to take lessons when I was 15, and I was like, fuck that. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. That's stupid.
Yeah.
And I took 2 lessons formally once in my 20s. And I remember it was a guy in a band called Pacific Gas and Electric. I don't think he's with us anymore. But this band called PG&E, and they toured with Creedence Clearwater Revival and Jimi Hendrix. They were like a 60s garage rock band. And my mom was friends with the guy from way back, and they whatever. And they found each other on MySpace, and so she goes, oh, Brent. She goes, he's living in Valley Village, and he's a jazz player now, and I'd love it if you would go get a lesson from him. I'll pay for it. And I was already in that mind space of in my early to mid 20s of like, I want to get better. I want to learn more stuff. I want to be a rock guitar player. I didn't want to play power chords. I wanted to learn more shit. And so I went to his house, and I had just done an album with, I don't remember who it was, but I went over there and we sat down. We started talking about this. There was no like, okay, this is a book. There was no lesson at all. And we sat and talked music for an hour, and he was like, well, this was great. You know, I feel bad charging your mom for the lesson. He goes, we'll come back in a week and we'll pick up some stuff. And he showed me some jazz chords, and I was like, I'll be honest, like I was like, I don't really want to play that. And then he goes, well, what do you want to play? And I remember playing him these two songs that had guitar solos on them that were mine. And still 15 years later, I still would listen to them and go, okay, it's actually a pretty decent guitar solo. And he goes, I don't know what you're playing. And so I'm like, well, it's like a augmented or whatever, and a this and a hammer on here, and I'm bending and some and he's learning, and he's oh, it's really interesting. An hour goes by, oh, thanks for coming. And then I go, my mom just paid this guy $150 for me to teach him my guitar solo. What the fuck is this? and he was like, if you want to come back, I'll teach you some stuff. And I was like, I'm good. I was like,
no, you're good.
No worries. And not to sound like condescending, but I got nothing out of it. I learned nothing. And so that was it. I think the next person to really sit me down and show me anything was probably 2018, 2019 playing with Tracy. And so, and even that's not like getting a lesson. That's just like, you know, like, oh, well, I'm doing this and you should do this. Like, and I'm like, oh, I don't know what that is. You know, he can break it down. Try to not look like an idiot when he's explaining.
Oh, yeah. Interesting choice. Yeah, okay. I would have gone to the other thing.
Yeah. Oh, so wait, so it's also this note here? Oh, yes, I knew that, of course.
Oh, yeah.
So, so the gunfight, Duane Peters, blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to really we've been going for over an hour now. We had a booking agent, and the guy, you might even know of him. This guy, Charlie, he had a band in the 90s called Custom Made Scare. And
I don't know them.
That's okay. He definitely knows Bones, and he knows Ron.
Oh, okay.
So Charlie Overby, and he was sort of a carryover from the 80s scene, but then he went punk. And so he was like singing for this punk band, Custom Made Scare, that was also on Side One Dummy. And then he was drumming for this band called Deadbolt, and he was booking the Dwarves, and he was booking the US Bombs.
Oh, wow.
And I was 24, 25. And I've gone through all this playing in all these bands. I think at one point I was in like 12 bands at once. I started this project with a bunch of female singers that became another band that's still going with these two female singers. I'm not going to mention them by name because I don't like them. But so that whole thing. And I had all these different projects going. I was in like a goth band. I was doing this jam thing with one of the guys from Wall of Voodoo, just anything.
Oh, wow.
And so this guy Charlie was booking Duane Peters' Gunfight and all this other stuff, and I did that whole thing for a few years. And he goes, you look like you should be in a rock band. Like, your hair's getting a little long, and you're tattooed, and you look cool. Why are you wasting your time in these stupid punk bands? He goes, and I said, I actually am looking for an in to play in rock bands. Like, I tried to join, like I sent an email to Wednesday 13 from the Murder Dolls, like manager, like, I heard you guys need a guitar player, and they never got back to me. And then, of course, he's like a good friend of mine now. And so he brought me into this project he had when I was 25-ish, called Charlie and the Valentine Killers. And it was sort of like Social D meets, I don't know, like Americana. Yeah. And we did dates with Reverend Horton Heat. We did about 5 shows with Headcat, with Lemmy from Motorhead, obviously.
Yeah.
Production. And we did a tour, a full Western America with David Allan Coe, and that was a trip. And so, and that band had all these people in and out of it. It had like Brian Forsyth from Kicks in the band, who now, interestingly enough, lives walking distance from me.
I know Brian.
Yeah, I love such a good dude. And Jerry Montano on bass at one point, who had just come out of Danzig, and before that was in Hell Yeah. And then now he and I are doing something again. He just sent me a song this week. And then Chad Stewart from Faster Pussycat and Danny Nordahl later on, the bass player, the rhythm section of Faster Pussycat. Yeah. And that was it. I did that band for about 2 years, and at 26, 27, Pussycat needed a guitar player, and Chad and Danny were like, we play in this other band with Ace. They brought me to Tammy's house, and I met him maybe 2 or 3 times, and he gave me a CD, and he said, don't suck, Bubba. And off I went, and that was how I joined Faster Pussycat, and that was how I got to where I am now. Obviously, that's a whole 12 years ago, but that was how I met Ricky, and that was how I met Tracy and Phil Lewis, and anything to do with 80s rock, whatever you would call it, hair metal 80s stuff, all came on the tail end of me joining Faster Pussycat, and then keeping that momentum going of like, how do I network and whatever. Because after, I don't know, probably 3 or 5 years in Faster Pussycat, I was like, okay, I'm ready for something the fuck else immediately. And there were things that came up, like I did about 8 months, only not very many shows, but I was in Unwritten Law for 8-9 months, and I did a plethora of other projects, some still going, some not, and filled in for people. And I played with Steven Adler from Guns N' Roses for a minute, and all these other things. But the mainstay for that 9.5, 10 years, from 2010 to 2019, was Faster Pussycat, and then LA Guns, and then here I am.
So like with that transition was it just kind of, or were you putting yourself out there, or was it just through, like, did anyone actually know any of the punk bands that you had been in, like, or was it like just a completely different scene? I know there's some guys that are, came out of the punk scene.
Yeah.
But well, it almost seems like it's two completely separate universes.
It is, and then it isn't, because what I always say is, like, after about early 2000s, I feel like there was sort of like an unspoken truce between every band ever of like, hey, okay, are you in a band that has a singer and a drummer and a guitar player? Okay, so you're playing like real music, like rock or metal or punk or ska or whatever. Okay, cool. Me too. We're in a real band. We're not like some dude with a headset and a laptop and like a what are those things called? A chaos pad. You know what I mean? Like or like a guy singing over like a backing track or whatever the fuck. Like we're all collectively like in a real band. Like it's basically like we're all in a rock band. And when like touring with Tammy and Pussycat early on, learning that, like, I was like, oh, we both love Turbo Negro, and we both love Zodiac Mind Warp, and we both love these bands like the Super Suckers that are like, they're not really a punk band, but they're not a rock band, but they're not a hair band, but they're not a metal band, but everybody appreciates them for whatever reason.
Right.
Like who doesn't love the Ramones? So, like, you don't have to be a punk band to like the Ramones. Like, I'm sure the guy in fucking, Obituary or what, I'm trying to think weird, I'm sure Enya is like, oh, I like that Ramones song. Like, it just, some things transcend that little niche or genre. And we all collectively agreed that we like the same shit. And so, it was easy to kind of get my foot in the door with that, because I wasn't there to talk about my favorite Bullet Boys album or why the second guitar player in Dawkins was this or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't into that. And
Smooth Up Enya is a good album. Like, I like that. Yeah,
that's there's some great stuff, but
great sounds, everything.
I catch a lot of flack, mostly from like the fan base, because they're like, what do you mean you didn't grow up listening to these bands? And I go, I'm sorry, I just didn't. And the only bands from this genre that I knew of before the age of 20 was Motley Crue, Guns N' Roses, LA Guns, Faster Pussycat, Rat, and maybe like maybe two or three other bands. Everybody else, all those sort of like third, fourth, fifth, seventh tier bands, I didn't know about. And Junkyard, I knew about Junkyard because of Brian Baker and because of Minor Threat and Bad Religion. And so any band that had like a crossover, like the guy that plays drums on the first LA Guns record is Nicky Beat. Nicky fucking Beat, who was in the Cramps and the Germs and Weirdos and maybe the Skulls and Gun Club. I can't remember. He was in all these LA punk bands, these quintessential LA first wave punk bands. Is the guy who played drums on the first LA Guns album. That's not the other guy. You know, come until after. So I always appreciated these little subtle connections. And the same thing with that first Pussycat album. I think if Faster Pussycat had and Jet Boy was another band I knew of. Right. And like if Pussycat all had short spiky hair or mohawks, that first Pussycat album, you'd be like, oh, that's a punk band.
Oh yeah. Like so like many of those early
right.
Like there's no difference. And it's like what got me thinking about it is Bratz did like some online like radio punk station interview, and like I can't remember who the other band was that was in before us. Like a couple of the guys like stuck around and we were just shooting the shit. And during our interview, I don't know what got me on it, but was just talking about like the punk rock guilt of like liking anything other than punk. And like even if something like resonates with you and actually are into it, are just afraid to say anything about it. And I can't remember who the band was, but the guy was like, yeah, man, like, you know, I think Rat was like pretty cool and stuff, but like, and he was like, obviously like, it was like watching someone come out to their Republican parents in the 80s, like, I'm gay. It's
because you weren't allowed. That was one of the things I had no problem. And it's funny, like everything behind me, like there's like Peter and the Test Tube Babies, and like I don't know what else is back there, but like a bunch of punk rock stuff is what I have that I was playing today. But like I got really tired of that kind of like mindset in my late teens and early 20s of like, this is what punk is in this little square, and if you don't, you know, and I grew up before I discovered punk rock. I didn't know about genres. I didn't know that was a thing. That was a high school thing. Like the punks are over there, and the goth kids are over there, and the metal kids are over there, and the raver kids are over there. You can't be friends with everybody. You can only be one clique only. And I was a fucking outcast because I was friends with everybody, and I liked a little bit of everything. And I mean, even my fucking record collection, it's nothing new. I'll go from fucking Sinatra to the Beach Boys to Testament to Lower Class Brats in an afternoon on vinyl without flinching, because that's what I like. I like the Eagles, and then I also like fucking 6 Feet Under, you know, or Slipknot or whatever. I mean, to Social D, I've got all of it, and I like that. And I think it would be so boring and vanilla to just be like, I only listen to UK 82 bands from circa 81 to 84. Anything before or after is not cool. And I saw so much elitism, especially in like the Southern California punk scene at that time when I was actually in it, involved 20 years ago, where I was like, this is dumb. This is stupid. And then as I joined, like when I was in Murphy's Law, those guys didn't give a shit. You know what I mean? They were like Jimmy G was like, oh, you like fucking weird shit? That's fucking cool. I like the Beatles. You know, and I was like, yeah, see? And the same thing with Duane or Kerry Martinez or any of these guys I looked up to as a kid, or even guys like Steve Jones, where you're like, the guys that you guys all worship don't just listen. Like, you think Bones is just sitting around only listening to fucking the Addicts or something like that? You know what I mean? Like, what a miserable, boring life that is. You can appreciate everything, and I think it's way more, not that I'm the beacon of punk rock, but it's way more punk rock to be like, fuck this, I don't give a fuck, I like what I like, fuck you, you know, than to pigeonhole yourself into like the same 30 bands, you know.
Yeah, it's like most the things that I've have stood up over the years, like riffs from Darkest Hour, like things that, you know, I wrote 20 plus years ago. Like the things that stand out most were influenced from bands completely outside of the spectrum. Like there's on that Victory record, the outro or the last song on that record was complete. The riff was like I had basically lifted the root notes from da do 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 da 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 by the Police, and I was like, this is a really cool change. Like, what if this was a triplet metal riff? Like, and make it all groany and dark. I was like, this is amazing. And it's just like, I feel like music gets so constricted when you don't venture out and like at least explore all the other stuff. Whether or not you like it or not is like, you don't know until you try it.
Of course. And we were kind of hinting at this earlier, but like, as a band with a drummer, a bass player, and a guitar player, or two or three, and a singer, there's really only so much you can kind of do. You know what I mean? Like, and that's when you're like, okay, well, this band's got a synth player. Oh, that's a texture I'm not used to. That's cool, you know, or whatever the fuck it is. Or your delay is backwards and you're playing some weird shit that sounds like it's like this backwards 60s stuff. You know, I mean, we really used to have to start really thinking outside of the box, because it gets frustrating when people are like, oh, I wrote this song and it's G and C and then G and then F. And I'm like, that's it? Like, I heard that already. Yeah, come on. What if we did this? Or what if, you know, we tuned down a full step? Or what if, you know, there's so many things to expand upon that. Fortunately, I think usually you get your front man, your singer, or whatever it is, or voices on it, is what changes it so much. I can't tell you how many times I've heard songs, even more recently, where I was like, oh, I don't know, it's just a song. And then it gets sent back with like this, you know, even on the new LA Guns record. Yeah. Like, I'm like, oh, wow, that's way cooler than it was when it was just an instrumental, where I was like, oh, it's 3 notes. That's drab, you know? Yeah. So it all depends on like who's performing on it and everything. I don't want to sound like I'm poo-pooing on anybody's like, fuck, I love Green Day and they're just 3 chords. Yeah. You know, I mean, not now they're not, but like most of that early stuff is just like all of Dookie is just 3 power chords over and over again.
And it stands up.
Yes. Yeah. Totally.
Great stuff. I love the through line of like gear is clearly like as kind of takes a back seat to like the drive and the initiative. And I think that's so important for people to understand. Like, it's not this, like, I think that's a big difference between like what I saw like growing up with like the 80s metal world was so much this like culture of bands waiting for someone to give them permission to be a band and to go out on tour. And that was such a big deal, versus being like, oh, I'm going to make this happen. I'm going to go out, like, I want to play music, so I'm going to make that happen.
Yeah.
And like,
well, I didn't grow up wanting to be a virtuoso or anything, and I didn't ever think like, oh, if I have all this rack mount gear and these expensive amps and these expensive guitars, I didn't think that was going to change really much of anything for me. It was more like having and needing and facilitating the drive. And then like admittedly, like, I'm a shitty guitar player, but like, you know, am I a solid rhythm guy and can I play lead guitar? Of course, I played lead guitar in a ton of bands. But like, you know, like I said, I've never had a lesson. I don't know what the fuck I'm talking about. I don't know theory, you know, and I grew up idolizing guys like Johnny Thunders minus the drugs part, but like, got, you know, and like Captain Sensible and Joe Walsh and guys like that were like really tasty and talented, but weren't like, I mean, Joe Walsh shreds, but like, I didn't grow up looking up to guys like Yngwie or even Tracy or guys like that, where I was aware of them, but I wasn't idolizing as players go or influences go. I didn't want to play like that. I wanted to play like Captain Sensible. I wanted like bluesy, tasty, simple rock riffs. And, I mean, fuck, when LA Guns did an EP about 2 years ago and we did a Damned cover, we did There Ain't No Sanity Clause.
Yeah.
And I got to play that like intro melody thing that Captain does. And it's just like, I remember doing it and being like, this is so cool. I'm doing a fucking Captain Sensible part in a band that's like, it's not, this isn't, it's like, this is a pre-existing, known band that's got its own dedicated fan base that people equally are, enjoy or whatever. It's not like if you and I did a Damned cover and we're like, oh, it's Fred and Ace's Jack-Off band. It's like, I'm like, so wait, I'm doing this in a band that's been around for 30 years. That's a legacy act that people know and love and respect. That's pretty fucking cool. Yeah. And I'm able to integrate my little fandom into that, or interject. Yeah. I appreciate.
Oh man, it was so funny on that on the Prong tour in Europe, the last one in Europe. Our tech, Sean McCann, is Captain Sensible's tech, like full time.
No way.
And just he's hilarious. Like all the stories were great. Like just how much, like it sounds like a tough gig for one, being his tech.
Yeah.
Because he would intentionally fuck shit up just to see if Sean was paying attention. Like
when I was in the Generators and Derek O'Brien from Social D was drumming for us, we did a tour of the UK, like 2 weeks with the Damned, which was, as I would say, one of my top 10 favorite bands of all time, was fucking awesome. But I know what you're talking about. I watched it firsthand. He'd like break shit or like, and I was like, what do you okay. I mean, old punks don't die, I guess,
Right on. So like, have it like through these conversations, like it's really cool to get perspective, especially like, because it's interesting, like you pointing out, like starting with punk and not having any real exposure to like the hair metal stuff. And like, that was kind of planted the seed early on, was like the 80s hard rock and metal, and seeing this like larger than life, like, because everything's in an arena, whether or not those bands were actually playing in arenas or not. Like the videos were shot in arenas and it looked big. Yeah. And it was just this thing that it was intangible. Like I couldn't connect the dots in my head. Like, how do I go from like playing guitar in my bedroom to that? And I'm definitely not as good as those guys. Like, I don't know that I'll ever be as good as them. So like having exposure to that at the beginning, like it's so fun, like just having the perspective on it. I see that the seed was planted where it's like, and I don't want to turn this into a therapy session, but like, like you're less than these other players, so why even bother trying? Versus like, I see it in like getting exposed to the punk scene. It was like, I was like, oh shit, I can do this. Like there is a lane for this. There is like having these songs, like seeing them resonate with people. Like my first show was going to see Rancid in a Veil in like 94 on one of the first Rancid tours. And like club was packed and kids were going nuts and they're stage diving. Everybody's singing and knows every single word. And I was just like, oh, and there's also no solos and like no one cares
like that.
So, but it's so funny that like, and that I'm grateful for that, and that gave me the inspiration to like actually want to pursue being in a band and going out and playing. But it's so funny that there's also this seed in the background, like you're still never gonna be good enough.
Yeah. Oh, I get that. I totally get that. And I'm not on like those chat boards or anything. I don't even have a Facebook, but like every once in a while I'll catch wind of like people, they're like, fucking Ace LA Guns or whatever. I'm just making this up, but like he's not even good. And it's like there are so many more things required for you to have a position in a band than just being some X level of talent, and which some people that maybe don't do what we do would not understand. But you know, I never wanted to be Shreds McGillicuddy. Yeah, if anything, my hair metal icon idol, what influence was Slash, and um, and that's as far into that as I can lean because he was like being an LA guy. I remember maybe circa 90, 91, 92, but I was also like 8, 9, 10. So it was just this weird, like, oh, MTV's on. Oh, look at those guys. They're wearing makeup and their hair's long. That's weird. But it didn't really hit me until probably 92, 93. And that was right when the crossfade was happening. And then,
Yeah.
of course, I remember Nirvana, Nevermind blowing up. And like all the first albums that I bought with my own money were all post hair metal bands, like post grunge explosion shit. It was like Pearl Jam 10, Stone Temple Pilots Purple, Green Day Dookie, Bush 16 Stone. I think Nirvana in Utero, I think was my first Nirvana album, and that's like the third record. So it was like that. I was that much further into the sort of timeline. I'm sure if I was 5 years older, I would have been exposed to that more, but I just wasn't. I remember seeing Motley Crue on MTV. I remember, I'm not even kidding. I remember my mom and I were somewhere and a guy got in a fancy car next to me and just like gave me like a weird little nod. I was like a little kid, and my mom came out. She goes, "Do you know who that was?" And I was like, "I don't know, a guy with tattoos." She goes, "That was Tommy Lee." And it was just like, okay. And that was like 1989. It was just, but that was LA, and so as I got more into that kind of stuff, the guy I gravitated to was Slash. And one of the reasons I gravitated towards that and then was able to go backwards and appreciate LA Guns and other bands was in freshman year or middle school, whatever, somebody gave me a copy of The Spaghetti Incident. And I was like, wait a minute. You mean to tell me this fucking hair metal band is doing an album of all punk covers?
Yeah.
And then going to my friends being like, you guys that like metal are in for a treat because these guys are covering Fear and Misfits and the Sex Pistols and the UK Subs and all this Dead Boys and all this stuff. And so, and then it just seemed like this thing where I was like, why I'm not interested in I didn't want to look like that. And I didn't have long hair until I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And my hair's up now. I don't know if you're doing anything with this video or if it's just audio. My hair is never down. I don't like having long hair. But I'm in a certain type of band where it's, I suppose, aesthetically expected of me. So I have longer hair. But if you see me
out the other route, I can't have long hair. Slash hair.
Well, dude, my fucking hairline is so far back now. My giant forehead that I've always had I hate it, but I get it. And it's like if I wasn't playing in a band professionally, I would have like a pompadoodle or whatever, because that's just how I always wear my hair like that. And people, even this week, it drives me fucking nuts. After 10 plus years, if you ever see a picture of me out and about or like at the grocery store or at home, whatever it is, my hair's always up. My hair's wavy and poofy, and I don't like, what am I getting all dolled up for? I just never wanted to look that way. And so I think when I joined Pussycat, I already came in looking how I looked. I was like in a sleeveless fucking, like Blitz t-shirt or something and like a studded belt and like Doc Martens that I still wear, and I was like, this is how I look. My hair can be long in 6 months if you need it, like whatever. And that was it. And nothing really changed, like in a sense where I was like, I didn't want to try to look, but I wasn't joining, I'm trying to think who was allowed. I wasn't joining like Winger. I wasn't joining some band that's aesthetic was tights and purples and blues and sparkle. I was joining Pussycat and LA Guns with bands that looked like a biker gang or punk rock dudes that just maybe had eyeliner and longer hair.
I feel like there's definitely like
Aerosmith meets punk.
Right, yeah. There's that whole contingent of bands that like played Cat House that were they get lumped
Junkyard.
into the same pool as like your Bang Tangos and Poison and whatnot, which like I like those bands too, but they're not like the
aesthetic.
Like, LA Guns is very like, to me it's a street punk band with solos.
Basically. Yeah, I mean it's the same aesthetic and attitude.
Yeah.
And that's the cool thing about working, and I haven't talked about Phil Lewis, but Phil and I were talking last week, and he was telling me about some time when, because he had that band Girl with Phil Collins.
Right. Yeah.
And this is late 70s, early 80s, and he told me, he goes, oh yeah, I remember we were recording the Girl album, and the studio next to us was The Exploited. And he's like, we're all hanging out and having beers and talking shop and all this shit. And he goes, we weren't worried about, oh, we're a pretty rock band and they're this dirty Mohican punk band. We were just some mates from whatever part of England, and we're doing some rock and roll. And I was like, that's exactly how it should be. And I appreciate the fact that two of the bands I guess I'm known for are the two bands, sans Guns N' Roses and like maybe Motley, that I personally, just as a fan or whatever you want to call it, think of when I think like, okay, what bands like kind of walk the walk and talk the talk and like look cool and like weren't just like, okay, we're gonna wear lipstick and purple lame, like whatever. Like when you look at the bulk, and of course there's some of that with both those bands, all those bands. You can find glammy pictures of Axl and Duff all made up too. If you try
Discharge, TSOL.
Yeah, even TSOL and that whole phase.
Yeah.
But I mean, like for the bulk, if you look at the average picture of LA Guns, like 88, 89, Faster Pussycat, 90, 91, they look like a biker rock band. They look cool. They still look like, I mean, I see bands emulate that look still. So I just think it's cool that these bands had this punk element that they interjected into the sort of glam hair 80s, whatever we're calling it, sleaze scene. And I sort of came with this prerequisite of like, oh, I already did that. Like I was like, I didn't need to like interject punk into the glam. If anything, I needed to interject the hair metal into my punk.
Right.
So it was a delicate balancing act, and it works. I mean, even Danny Nordahl from Faster Pussycat, his first gig ever, he was playing bass for Stiv Bators from the from the Dead Boys. And so, I mean, there are elements of that. And Tammy's first band, the Bondage Boys, that he name checks and Where There's a Whip, There's a Way. They were a punk band. And Tracy, I think early on was maybe more influenced by like some rock stuff that was going on, like UFO and everything like that. But I mean, Tracy, he'll tell you, he fucking loves the Germs and the Misfits and all that stuff just as much as he does guitar rock, which is why a guy like, it's why I work, you know what I mean? Is that they're like, oh, okay, you like both.
I think, because to me, like punk is like a work ethic, attitude. Like it's not like when I think of punk, it comes from like Richmond, Virginia, where I went to high school and kind of grew up.
Yeah,
was a big small scene. So
do you remember a band from there called Sixer?
Yeah. I know those guys.
I like that band.
Yeah. But it was like, it was big enough that bands would come through, but small enough that kind of everybody went to everybody's shows. So, Morbid Angel comes through. It's all the same people coming to see him as, if it was, Bloodlet Snapcase and Shelter, or, like Rancid and Avail, and like, or even going to like, there was like a huge math rock scene. There's bands like Sleepy Time Trio and this band Maximilian Kolbe that kind of spawned out of like the DC scene. So like all of that was punk. Like, metal was punk.
I mean, there's
the
definitely that same ethic carryover, and then also you get these really these great little, they're still major markets, but smaller cities where you've got a scene like that where everybody's just like, oh, a band's coming through, we're going. It's not like, well, are they a ska band? I only do ska now. You know, it was like you had these bands and these scenes where everybody, and I think we see less of that now in the last 10, 15 years, especially. Maybe it's a social media internet thing, but late 90s, early 2000s, into at least as far as back as I remember, into the early 2010s, or at least 2000s, you had that, and it was such a cool thing. And I don't know, there's a scene like that here in Nashville that's really cool, that's got, you know, because there's so many crossroads of music and genres happening here, but you know, there's so many bands, but I still appreciate it, because at the end of the day, I think what a lot of people forget is, at the end of the day, no matter what I say to you, or projects I do or don't do or whatever, it's like I'm ultimately still that like 16-year-old kid that's like, you know, I was talking to my girlfriend and I was like, I can't believe that, I'm not even going to name drop, but like, because it was my birthday recently, like all these people from different walks of life, different genre bands, different stuff, but like household name bands, like the guy from this band was like, hey bro, hope you're doing well, happy birthday, love you, talk to you soon. And I was like, you know, like, can't believe, you know. And so that to me carries more weight than like me being like, oh well, I think this about this band and blah blah. Like, who fucking cares? I'm just some dude. You know, we're all just one person. It's like, I'm not Jared Leto or some famous, you know, on some fucking what do you call it, pedestal. I mean, I have my opinions on things, but I mean, at the end of the day, through and through, I'm just a fan. And so that's everything that I've said on for the last 2 hours, God help us. The last 2 hours
probably split it up.
good. Has been is me waxing from a fan perspective first, rather than like, you know, I think this because I'm in this band or whatever the fuck. That doesn't matter. You know, I mean, I can tell you stuff about being in said band and have a perspective because I'm in the band,
right?
About the band, but like everything else is just like, I'm still just as enamored as the next person, and I'm just as, you know, when Tony Reflex from the Adolescents liked my tweet yesterday, I was like, yeah, you know, or whatever, like, what's so dumb, you know, and trivial, or whatever. A new album from a band I like comes out and I buy it on vinyl and I'm like, this is so rad, you know. It's still the same feeling. I know you get it. I know Ricky gets it, you know. And so it's to never lose that passion, and then also keep that sort of punk rock ethic that we have of like, you know, you got to make shit happen. If you didn't make shit happen, you wouldn't be in Prong, and you wouldn't be in LCB, and you wouldn't do this, and you wouldn't have done that. You wouldn't be, you know, Ricky wouldn't be calling me being like, this rad dude I'm talking to. Do you know this guy? I go, of course, yeah. Everybody, you know, it's just, you get to that. We didn't just wake up. There are these, you know, some armchair warriors out there that are like, oh, you just lucked out and ended up in this band. And it's like, no, motherfucker, I worked my fucking ass off my entire life. And if it seems like I'm resting on my laurels now at times, I go, and I'm going to leave the pandemic aspect out of it. I go, it's because I've worked, you know, when I'm like, oh, I don't want to deal with it, I'm just going to have my tech deal with it. I go, I had to work for 20 years to have a tech to get it to a point where I could go, I'm not going to restring a guitar, pshaw. You know, I didn't just fall off the turnip truck yesterday. I had to work to the point to where I could go, you know what? I think for this tour, I don't want to touch a piece of fucking gear. I'm going to let you handle that shit, since that's what your job is, you know, right? So
I've only had that a handful of times, and it's
nice, right?
Such a luxury.
Yeah.
And it's like, but I think it's also recognizing that's a luxury. It's like, it is a luxury. Having
a tour manager, a bus driver, those are luxuries.
A bus, you know, like, and all of that. Like, I mean, it's coming at it with the perspective of like gratitude and just being like, I don't expect this. When you get it, it's amazing. And it's like, I may never have this again, but we have it right now, and this is awesome. It's like being out on tour, like, you know, I've had little moments like that where it's just like first European tour, going out, and I remember we were at a metro stop in Munich, and looking across. It was like across from backstage. I don't know if you've ever played there in Munich.
Oh, of course, yeah. See the logo.
And the compound's like, you know, just across from the station that we were at, and I think I was Backyard Babies had just started, and I was like super into. I was like, whoa, this band's like great, and like Hardcore Superstar were kind of starting out then, and I was like, oh, these bands are really cool. They're like kind of punk, and they're also like rock. They're like all the things that I like. And they were playing over there, and of course we were playing at, it's our first tour over there. We're playing at, whatever center or someone's house or whatever. Yeah. And I remember the tour manager / driver that we had, he's like, oh yeah, that's where the big bands play and stuff. And then rolling up with Prong and in a bus and getting off, being like, the first thing I see is that train station. I was just like, just having that little moment where it was just like, fuck, this is crazy.
Yeah. Now you're doing the big shit.
And it's not even that big, but it's just like, just seeing that, and it just taking the moment to appreciate that something like that happened, and like not forgetting how lucky you are to get to do this on a even semi-regular basis. So
and I always, and gratitude and humility and all that really is a big factor in what we do, and doing it and then not being a fucking diva or whatever about it too. And obviously I'm apt to have my moments, as any human being is, but trying to be grateful for the fact that we've been given multiple opportunities. You're not just in one band or known for one band, you know what I mean? Or whatever you want to call it, the multiple trajectories. And, imagine if I had stopped after Madcap, or I stopped after playing with whatever. And, who knows what, is in the cards for the future, especially now. But, it's just like trying to imagine what we're going to do next and keep forward momentum going. And anybody that thinks that we just woke up and fell out of bed into a signed band or a known band, or whether it's Prong or any or LA Guns or whatever it is, or anything like that, it's like there's always some, like me here for 2 hours literally rambling about nonsense, but there's some 10, 12, 15 year history where arguably a lot of the people that are going to hear or watch or whatever format this goes to for you, for me, if it's my fan base or wherever we're calling these, anybody that supports me that's hearing this is going to go, oh, I first heard him in 2013 or 17 or 19 or 2022. But little do they know is that, like, it started with me and that piece of shit crate amp in like 1999, and being like, okay, just like you're saying, like, how do I get from my bedroom to this video, and sort of each little baby step along the way. Because and of course there's those cases of people that fell out of bed into that gig, but 99.999% of the rest of us working musicians or career musicians or whatever you want to call it, there's this long winding tale of, like, even like your first band or whatever it is, there's always some backstory. And it's fun for me to recant some of these tales, because that's not something I get to divulge on a regular basis, but it's been fun, especially having a renewed interest in my punk rock roots over the last few years, where I've sort of gone back and been like, oh, I was never embarrassed of anything, but like, I'm no longer trying to be like, I'm this guy from Faster Pussycat or whatever it is. I'm more interested in being like, oh yeah, that's this chapter, but I've done all these other things, and if anybody wants to, check them out or whatever. Like, I had boxes and boxes of my first band CD still. I mean, we pressed like 2,000 of them or so. And of course, I have hundreds of them still, and they sat in storage until about 2 years ago, because I was like, oh, I don't want anyone to know about that. We don't talk about that. I don't, And then as I was like, first of all, I could easily be selling these and have been. And second of all, I was like, you know what? Why should I be embarrassed of that? It's a rancid clone street punk band that's actually, for a bunch of 17 and 16-year-old kids, is pretty fucking good. Yeah. So it's like, you know what? Fuck it. And then it lets people that maybe, are aware or fan, I don't know what the term is, supporter of whatever I do to be like, oh my God, you did this and you were a teenager and this is from 20 fucking years ago. That's cool. Like, just the same way if Captain Sensible put out a single that he did when he was 15, not everybody would give a shit, but guys like us would be like, whoa, that's cool. You know?
Man. Well, I think that's a good place to stop here.
Yes, sir.
I really appreciate you coming on. I'll stop the recording if you want to hang on for just a second.
Yeah.
Say goodbyes, but thank you so much again, Ace.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. I really do.
Of course.